Assalamualaikum, my name is AKMAL and my team members are MUSLIHAH, ZURIYANI, NISYA and AMI. Welcome to our presentation video about inflation in Australia. I will provide an introduction about inflation in Australia. One of the assessment in the principle of economic cost is to discuss and write a report on chapters 9. Student must select one country to study as a case study. As a result, after a few discussions, we provide a report on Australian inflation. In this research, we will explore further into the Australian economy in terms of inflation types, causes, effect, and measure to control the issue. Firstly, we will analyze the data of inflation from 2019 to 2023. Then, we will explain the cause of inflation increase or decrease that year. This will tell us if the country's economy is doing well or poorly in a given year, even if inflation has been improving in recent years. Second, we will go over how Australia tackle the inflation that occurs in their economy. At the end of our report, we will provide a conclusion and try to provide new ideas on how to enhance the country economy. We hope that the publication of this report will provide a full understanding of inflation from a fundamental concept to technical aspect. We understand the causes and effect of inflation as well as how to keep inflation under control in the country. As a result, we believe that the readers will find our report interesting and delighted with how we offer it.
Thanks to AKMAL, my name is ZURIYANI and I want to explain about summary of the macroeconomic issues. Inflation is one of the macroeconomic issues. The definition of inflation is a continued increase in the general price level of goods and services in the economy, and subsequently, the purchasing power is falling. When this happens, people's living standards will fall. This is due to the fact that each ringgit is worth less, so consumers must pay more to obtain the same goods and services. By referring to the main article, which is about inflation in Australia, inflation occurs when the price of a collection of everyday goods and services that make up the consumer price index costs more than they did previously. Deflation, which is the reverse of inflation, is not an environment that is beneficial to a robust economy. Next, we can use the Consumer Price Index, which is CPI, to measure inflation. The CPI is an indicator of changes in retail prices. The CPI is used to track changes in the cost of a variety of goods and services that a typical family would purchase. The most popular inflation indicator is the CPI. The measure of inflation rate is CPI this year minus CPI previous year, divided by CPI previous year and multiplied by 100. Lastly, refer to the main article, the ability to spend money on things like vacation and leisure was dramatically restricted during the epidemic lockdown. Mortgage payments were reduced since interest rates were low, despite the fact that Australia's bailout was among the most generous in the world. Several governments throughout the globe followed a similar course. Next, I will pass to Amy to explain about types of inflation.
Thanks to Yani. My name is NUR'AME Natasya. Now I will explain to you about the types of inflation. The inflation issues in Australia happens when the request for goods and services surpasses supply, permitting business to increase prices. The pent-up demand for travel and other goods has caused costs to rise. In any case, not everybody profited financially from the pandemic, and the cost of living crisis is affecting people's day-by-day life. The modern economic theory categorizes several types of inflation occurring in this country. Based on the article, one of the types of inflation is demand pull inflation. The factor that causes this level of inflation is to occur when there is a significant amount of excess money in the economy, as this push up demand levels. In the article, it is mentioned that the easing of lockdown limitations has come about in a surge in demand for goods and services, especially in the case of travel. As consumers have collected savings during the lockdown period, they are presently willing to spend more. In any case, the supply of goods and services has not completely caught up with this increasing demand, leading the price increases. The other types of inflation in Australia is cost-push inflation. The cost-push inflation refers to an increase in the general price level associated with an increase in the cost of production that leads to a reduction in aggregate supply. It happens when the cost of production increases, driving business to raise costs to preserve their profits margin. The article highlights the geopolitical factors, such as the Russian-Ukraine war has driven to a shortage of supplies of foods and thus rising costs. The amplified lockdowns in China exacerbate supply shortage because of the disturbance to manufacturing. As business confront increased costs, they may pass on this cost to consumer through higher prices, causing cost-push inflation. And that's all for me. Next, I will pass to Nisha to explain the cause of inflation.
Thank you to Amy's explanation about the types. My name is NUR'AME. I will explain about the cause of inflation in Australia. Australia's inflation is at its highest level in 33 years as a result of confluence of domestic and global factors. This includes the inflation of Ukraine by Russia in 2022, the interruption of gas and other export, the lasting effects of the pandemic stimulus measures, and the accumulation of savings in sizable portion of Australian households. Like in any other nation, there are a number of causes that might affect inflation in Australia. Here are a few typical reasons for Australian inflation. The first one is international factors. Inflation in Australia frequently influenced by external events, such as worldwide conflicts that lead to price increases. For instance, the Ukraine conflict has contributed to the change in the price of oil and gas, which have an impact of the pricing of goods and services. The COVID-19 pandemic has also significantly disrupted the global supply, causing shortage of numerous products and rising costs. Next, the rates of inflation in Australia may be unexpectedly impacted by exchange rates. As import costs become higher and consumer purchasing power decreases, a weaker Australian dollar may cause higher inflation. The price of imported products and services rises when the exchange rate depreciates. Because imports become more expensive, it might result in a lower currency since it can be more expensive for enterprise to get funds, particularly from international source. On the other hand, by lowering the cost of import, a stronger Australian dollar can be contributed. So that's all about causes. Next, I will pass to the next presenter, MUSLIHAH, to explain about the effects of inflation in Australia.
Thanks to Nisha. My name is SITI MUSLIHAH. In this section, I will explain to you how inflation can make Australia's economy become unstable in terms of individuals, society, and country. Inflation has a variety of effects on an economy, both beneficial and negative. The seriousness of the negative effects is determined on whether the inflation is unanticipated or unanticipated. In this case, the inflation that hit Australia is an unanticipated inflation, which is inflation that comes as a surprise to the public. Now, what is the effect of inflation on individual? According to the article, the demand in travel for a domestic ticket increased higher than the supply right after the lockdowns ended. This resulted in the prices of the ticket also increasing almost 20% higher than it was in 2019, before the pandemic began. At this point, inflation has occurred. This problem happens because of demand higher than the supply, so to make it reach a better equilibrium point, the prices have to be raised. In this case, the businessmen are a gainer because of they gain a benefit out of this pandemic, as they can make more profits from rising prices. So that is one of the positive effects of inflation. Another effect of inflation is it can raise the cost of living towards society, especially those who come from the poor and middle classes, also who have lost their jobs or incomes during lockdowns implemented. Inflation will cause this group of society to use their savings to survive and make their savings become lower. The opportunity to make a loan for this group of society is high. As a result, debts will increase. In addition, as the cost of living rises, workers tend to strike, resulting in a loss of production. Profiteers resort to hoarding, black marketing, adulteration, the manufacture of substandard supplies, speculation, and other illegal activities. Corruption affects all aspects of existence. All of this declines the economy's efficiency. Lastly, inflation can affect the balance of payments of a country. Australia is a major exporter of iron ore, coal, and petroleum. During the pandemic lockdowns, the supply of these products decreased because of the disruption to manufacturing. This situation caused the prices of those products to become higher in the country. When local prices rise faster than foreign prices, domestic products become more expensive in comparison to foreign products. This tends to increase imports while decreasing exports, making the country's balance of payments unfavorable. That's all. I'll pass this discussion to my teammate Yani.
Thanks to MUSLIHAH. For this part, I will explain about the measure to controlling inflation. There are many ways to control the inflation that happens in Australia. According to the main article, the key strategy for controlling inflation is raising the cash rate, which the Reserve Bank of Australia (RBA) did on February 1 by raising it to 3.35%, the highest level in 10 years. Mortgage loans are impacted by the cash rate, which is the interest rate that banks to pay borrow money from other banks in the money market, while the government has several occasionally competing economic agendas. The RBA is solely focused on reducing inflation. Its major tool is to cut back on expenditure, which boosts public confidence in its capacity to decrease debt and raises expectation about how long high inflation will last. Another way to control inflation is through fiscal policy. For example, the government reduces inflation by decreasing spending or increasing tax, reducing available funds. Other than that, by using monetary policy, the government can raise the reserve requirement, increase the amount of reserve requirement to reduce cash resources in commercial banks. The last way to control inflation is by using direct control measures. For example, first, rationing and price control. Second, the government needs to take action on wage policy. And lastly, we can launch a campaign against hoarding. That's all, and I will pass to AKMAL to explain about conclusion.
Next, conclusion. In conclusion, inflation is a macroeconomic issue facing Australia. While some inflation can be beneficial for the economy, high levels of inflation can have negative consequences such as reduced purchasing power and reduced economic growth. Inflation in Australia is driven by several factors such as demand pull inflation and cost push inflation. Policymakers must monitor inflation carefully and take appropriate measures to maintain price stability and promote economic growth. This may involve implementing monetary policy such as increasing the interest rate, raising the discount rate, raising the reserve requirement, and open market supply, and implementing fiscal policy such as adjusting government spending or taxation. By understanding the causes of inflation and implementing effective policies, Australia can continue to enjoy a stable and prosperous economy. However, policymakers must balance the need for price stability with the need for economic growth, as excessive inflation or deflation can have negative consequences for the economy and society as a whole.